Hello, fellow innovators. This is Patrick Emmons. Welcome to the Innovation and the Digital Enterprise Podcast, where we interview successful visionaries and leaders, giving you an insight into how they drive and support innovation within their organizations. Today, we're very excited to be talking with Jason Dole. Jason is currently the CTO at World Book. Jason's background is more in, the startup culture, being a results-driven team leader, more of an agile software development perspective, things from gathering requirements to launch. He spent many, many years in team building and structuring and experience with in-house software, hardware development, local and remote and outsourced teams. We're really excited about having him on the show today. So, Jason, welcome.
Thank you, Patrick. It's a privilege to be here.
Yeah, as we were talking before we started the episode here, we talked about your background. You've got a lot of experience in startups. Your previous organization, started out as a startup, got acquired, and now you've moved on. You've been with World Book for about 2.5 years right now?
Yes, that's correct.
So, what's a startup guy doing? We're joining World Book.
I think that's a great question. Being part of a startup, how do you bring the innovation to enterprise? And I think that's a gap that many enterprises struggle with. And I saw an opportunity to turn around an iconic brand, combining a startup with an enterprise and seeing where we can go with that and transforming to a digital transformation that World Book was looking to build upon the brand and evolve from. I looked at it as a unique opportunity because there's not too many companies that are, for one, that old or been around that long that really are in the position to capitalize on such a transformation and evolution for where they're at today.
That's great. And I guess maybe I jumped a little early in making the assumption that everybody knows who World Book is. For most of us of a certain age, World Book is something we all grew up with. It's something we knew. And obviously challenges moving into that new digital first, going from a 3-dimensional sitting on the shelf product, right, and that's why we're really excited about having you on today, because I think when we look at a lot of organizations that you mentioned, bringing innovation to the enterprise, to the established, right, there are very few who have had as much success as an organization like World Book historically, right, and is looking at the future saying, how are we going to remain in control, remain on top, be viewed as that source of really high valuable content and information, right? And so the transformation that you're trying to accomplish, I guess as the role of CTO, right? The CTO role is kind of new, right? I think we talked about that as well, as like, it used to be always the CIO. There was a CIO, and I think this transformation of going from IT to software product is one of those things that drives that chief technology officer. So as you're establishing yourself within the organization and trying to drive innovation, what do you think, a lot of our listeners are looking at this in their own organizations. What do you think are some of the key elements that you're doing to create a fertile ground for innovation at World Book?
I think the core of any innovation within a company like that is to truly take into account what you do today and how do you do it better. Coming into an organization like that's been established as World Book, they're obviously doing things well to get this longevity that they've had. And how do you build upon the foundation that they've set? But they've also, on the flip side, they've also become accustomed to their ways. Here's what we've done, and what we've done in the past has been successful. Unfortunately, what has worked in the past doesn't mean it's going to work in the future. And, it's kind of a cliche statement, but every company needs to become a technology company, no matter what business you're in. And World Book's no different. And trying to come in and lead with the software development to make things from our book processing more efficient to our digital products that we offer schools, libraries, districts, states, more valuable. The content itself is only one piece to the dimension. The key really is, how do you start to add value or tools around the content that traditionally are not in the education space. Right now, the education space is going through a major transformation and really trying to find itself, which is why you see a lot of publishing companies like ours, and others that are in there struggling to how to transform and where it's going to head. There's no silver bullet in this industry. There's no, this is the way, here's the path, here's where everything's heading, because of how scrambled each institution, school, and district is. They don't correlate. There's no standard per se. Each state's different. Each district's different. Each school's different. And so how do you come up with a solution that encompasses all of what they need and what they want? Because also what used to work 10 years ago for students is vastly different than what works today. Our generations are different. The phone and the iPads are relatively new tools that students are getting access to, especially Chromebooks. And so that's really changing the fundamental piece of where we want to head and how we want to do it.
Interesting. So it's a great question then. So seems like a lot of work, right? So what are some of the things that you think, a successful CTO does, right, inside the business to actually elicit these types of changes, or to be part of, or maybe even the instigator of change?
Yeah, I think first, a CTO has come in and realized it's not just operations and risk mitigation anymore. And you have to learn how to be a business partner and align the technology platform strategy with where the business really wants to head. And that sometimes foresee before the business knows, and where you want to go with that, and try to anticipate as much change as possible. I think the core really is getting your platform and your systems nimble enough so that you can pivot at any given moment, because in any industry, speed is one of your greatest advantages. The faster you can change, the faster that you can roll out changes and not disrupt your production, the better you will be and be able to adjust to where the future heads.
Interesting. I always think, like, we're both football fans, right? And the Bears are clearly, in my assessment, they went through a big transformation, and it doesn't look like it's going very well right now. Looks like we've got some setbacks. We made some big bets, and those bets aren't paying off too great. And I think about that when I think about some of these digital transformations. I think about CTOs, and I think about, what is that window, right? Because I'm looking at the GM pace, thinking this might be your last year, right? This could be the end of it, right? Like, you were given an extra year kind of after the previous two, and now it's not looking like we got 3 more years of rebuilding ahead of us. Mm-hmm. So, but I also think about that as, like, you're talking about some very serious change, right? And it's going to require a lot of leadership discipline, right? So when you go in, are you looking for easy wins? Are you looking to just, set a platform, set an expectation, or what, because 3 years is a long time for a business to wait. And there's situations I've talked to other customers, other people that I've worked with where, you say, like, this is the right thing. They know it, but it's going to take 3 years, and that won't survive. Is that something you're dealing with?
Absolutely. I think it's a fine balance, on how to manage that. I don't think there's any silver bullet that truly you can say, this is how you do it, and this holds tried and true through each company, but you have to have small wins. Otherwise, if you don't have small wins, you lose confidence. People that are non-technically or don't have the tech savviness as executive presidents, they have operating incomes and financial numbers that they have to meet no matter what is going on with the business. And so, yes, it's a fine balance that you truly have to navigate throughout the company. It's not just the executives, but you have to get everybody on board for the small wins to show that this stuff is going to make a change, but then also setting the foundation for long-term goals as well.
And one of the things we talked about was that urgency, right? Creating urgency around, there's some organizations that understand the existential threats that exist in the marketplace. And I think this is the big challenge with organizations that are established. There's some that do and some that clearly do not, right? So, and somebody with your background understands, right, when you're in a startup, you're fighting for your life, fighting for a month, fighting for a day, right? Like, we just got to keep going. There's a lot of risk, and it's just baked in. And there was a great article in Harvard Business Review yesterday about innovation theater, right? There's a lot of organizations that talk about innovation, and they have the perception that they're being innovative, but they're not really, in essence, being innovative. And it's process over product is what they focus. The process is what has drive value for the business. The product is what drives value for the customer, right? So, in your experience, when you come to that situation where process is, overwhelming product, new ideas, innovation, things like that, is there things that you've done that you think have really kind of either gotten over, gotten around, gotten through?
Yeah, and I think that's where you have to find that fine balance of bringing a startup to established culture, and realizing that the main thing that matters and you'll be judged by is the outcome, the product. And at the end of the day, some of the process were built and predate where technology really was more about risk mitigation than innovation. And sometimes you have to work your ways around the processes or and some of them scrap it. I mean, you have to really get that urgency of just getting the job done. And, obviously there's consequences and things and risks that come with that, but that's also a fine balance for each project. For example, if you want to move throughout the bureaucracy, you can't just say this is going to happen because of my title. That's great for a short term, but for the long term growth that you really want, you have to really start to influence the key players in the position. So learning who those key players are throughout your company and showing them that you truly have a vision of where you want to go with this, and there's a means behind the madness of what you're trying to do. It's easy in a startup a lot of times because the processes aren't there. You're just, like you said, fighting for the day to day. Hey, we've got to get this out. We can iterate and fix it if we break it or if something happens. But at the end of the day, we have to get this out to make next payroll or maybe next revenue numbers. And how do you bring that urgency to an established company? And I think you can start small on some of the smaller projects that normally would go through the bureaucracy and the normal process and would take months. We went from a company that launched I'd say 3 to 4 times a year to now we're launching every 2 weeks because we have to be iterative. Now, that was a major disruption in our industry because not only do you have to tell your clients and your customers that these launches are coming, because it's not like Facebook where they just push it out. Hey, it's new. You get to live and you just deal with it because you're not paying for the product. Unfortunately, you are disrupting teachers and students during the schools. And so you have to formulate the major releases around the school year, but make the incremental ones during the school year, but then having a communication channel that allows them to know the changes that are coming before they're coming. And that's really a challenge at times because you want to be as fast as you can and you start to preach about speed to market and changes and we can fix things and do that. But at the same token, you have to be very conscious of you have customers out there that live and breathe this every day, built it into the curriculum, built it into everything they do. So disrupting them to some extent that, that's a loss of revenue if you really make it to where they're not seeing the value of the constant change as well.
Yeah, I think when you brought up the idea of starting small and things like that, your background with the previous organization having been acquired to a larger organization, right? The acquirer organization wasn't enormous, right? But I guess, is there, from your experience, having been through that from the acquisition side, what would you think is, because I think I see that with a lot of our clients or a lot of people that I know where they're like, hey, we're going to, either start a startup, an entirely uniquely formed organization to stay away from some of the safety nets, delays that occur. But I also, interesting from your experience, boots on the ground experience of as that occurred, and you hear stories about and then we got brought into the Borg, right? Part of the collective. And all the things that made us special were, destroyed. And then people are surprised that it didn't work. From your background, your experience, and I don't know how it went there, what do you think is a more successful way to, if a large organization wants to bring in a startup and say, look, this is something that we think is, going to give us an advantage. We have good market fit. We can take advantage of this. They've clearly built something we want. Is your experience to integrate them? Is your experience, and not just experience, but I guess your recommendation, right?
Yeah, I mean, seeing this done in various different ways throughout my time at my previous employer, I really believe you have to keep them separate. Because unfortunately, there's going to be what I call energy pirates that will suck the energy out of the project just because either one, they feel that you're taking their job, you're redoing things differently, or they hold on to what they're comfortable with. And so you've got to get the team that is going to disrupt or trying the innovation in a separate team because you want them working outside the normal framework confines or restrictions that are normally put in place for the teams. And so that they're thinking truly outside the box. I mean, it's one of these that either you are the carnivore that digests it and you take over, or somebody else is going to do it. Unfortunately, we're in a world that I believe that speed does matter, and innovation is truly what makes you competitive. And if you don't innovate, somebody else will innovate, and it's only a matter of time before each industry feels this pain. I think some industries have obviously been disrupted way faster than others. In the publishing education space, I think it's still in the early innings of disruption because in ours, there's gatekeepers. It's a very hard job to sell to all the districts and schools and state institutions, that normally are not the same barriers for a business to business type transaction.
That's a great point. People think of they're going to get, innovated out. They're going to get, disrupted. But I do think another case where I see that is Uber Freight, right? Uber is great in that it's a B2C, right? There's no barrier for them to make that direct relationship. But now that they're getting into freight, they know that there are relationships there. There are people there that have to be part of the process. It can't be, we're just going to do this at scale and we're just going to send out a bunch of apps, right? There's process. And people have said, and in my opinion is that's why Uber Freight's here in Chicago now. They need those relationships, right?
And I think it goes back to what we're saying is you have to truly take your customers into account of that process. I think everything has an assembly line, all the way from requirements gathering to market intelligence gathering to software engineering to then what's your market rollout plan. Normally a lot of SaaS providers just push things out with no regard to the customers. And when you go to B2C, as we are in the school space, you have to take that into consideration and then involve them in that process because they are paying you at some, various different amounts, but they really have skin in the game as well, more so than your B2C, which is, one to many type deal.
Yeah. No, it's really an interesting situation of disruption, right? Of because who knew taxis, right? If you were going to pick somebody really sexy industry to go after, it probably wouldn't have been taxis.
But that's one of the ones that were easier to. There's no barrier to entry, and it's just you get right in, and at the end of the day, there's the establishment there had no moat, let's call it, that can protect other companies from coming in.
Yeah. And there might be an opposite of a moat that what looks like a barrier, right? The regulation of government, you had to go buy a sticker, you had to get the little placard thing to be a taxi cab driver. And then,
But I think that's a great story because they went out and did it first. And then we're like, okay, what happens next?
Right.
We'll settle now that we have an established business there and we have a market and we've shown you that these things are, how do we make this work for, whatever fines or fees or things that we need to pay to get into compliance?
And one of those lessons from their standpoint is you pick specific markets, right? So it's start small. Right. Mm-hmm. Is that something from your experience as well of when you're starting to think about because again, to boil the ocean, you're going to spend a lot of time dealing with a lot of things. So what's your market? Start as, small of a niche as you possibly can.
And that really is. And so we've taken that a few times. So we are predominantly, our niche is between K and 12. And how do we pick a few of those grades? We have different products that align to each of those grades. And so let's start with that one grade. We started with the smaller K to 2. How do we start to disrupt of what we want, what we believe is disruption in the industry, and start changing the model to where it's not just content. We are starting to really create tools around this content, and starting to really think about different technologies like augmented reality or virtual reality and how they're going to play into the evolution of education. I think we're still at the early innings. I don't think we're quite there yet, just because of the economies of scale are not there for hardware and different variants frameworks. But I think we're just starting to get the tip in the next few years to where you're really going to see that start to leak into there. But how do you build that platform that's going to take advantage of what I would call the new wave of disruption?
Interesting. Yeah, you mentioned Chromebooks before, right? It seems to be pretty predominant as the platform of choice for many education.
Which wasn't always the case. I mean, I think if anybody in the industry, they thought iPads were going to be it,
Right.
and it came down to cost. iPads at the time were $600, $800, and Chromebooks, $150. Well, let me see here. Well, what advantage do I get outside of an Apple product that I don't truly get with the Chromebook?
Yeah. And it is, historically, Apple was always the education, right? The Apple II, Apple IIe, right, was something I remember first, second grade.
That was my first computer.
Right, right. My first home computer was a PC Junior, which still exists in my parents' home. So if you ever want to come over and play Space Quest, we can crank that bad boy up.
Right through the Oregon Trail.
That's right. I never played that. Everybody brings that up. Like, oh, don't turn around when you're in the river. I'm like, I have no idea what that means. That has no context for me. Zork, on the other hand, I'm totally on board with, right? You're in a clearing. Anyway, so enough video games. Those weren't even video games. Those were, I'd be amazed if we showed our kids like what we had. They'd be like,
what is this?
Right, exactly. Like, I'm bored.
You're doing DOS command prompts.
But I do, and I think that's, like watching the education space is so interesting, right? I have kids and they're in that space, and it's very interesting. The different modalities of learning that are now supported, right? Like this product called IXL. I don't know if you're familiar with this.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you keep playing a game and you're learning the whole time. And like one of my kids' job is to screenshot his results to his teacher, where it's like, okay, when you get to 85, you screenshot your results. I think that is super exciting to me, right? As somebody who wasn't really the greatest student in the world, and like the ways that people learn are so different, that results outcome is so interesting to me. So like the engagement and like getting information and learning to these different generations and the different modalities that are supported, it sounds like that's a big part of where you're going, where World Book is going.
Yes, absolutely. And I think gamification on all different levels is one of the next waves that are, if not already here, that's truly transforming education. Because, the model that has worked for so long of just repeat, or how do you teach to everybody, repeat it, take a test, memorization. You're not really learning per se. You're just learning how to memorize. And how do you enhance that competency outcome? That where you really know that you have achieved that task, but still make it fun, because each student is different. So you got to find that sweet spot. Not every kid in the class is going to have that same sweet spot. So there's lots of different technologies that are coming to the classroom, like adaptive learning and gamification. And I think a combination of those with a few others that are really going to make this an interesting space that is ripe for disruption, because there is no answer yet that works across all spectrums. Somebody in Arkansas is vastly different than a student in California. They're going to have just different needs or different curriculum standards. But, I think technology can really bridge the gap to try to find that sweet spot for each student and really make it individual learning experience, so that you really preach to the student as opposed to a generalization. Now, I don't see education or technology surpassing or supplementing or replacing the teacher. I think it's more of an aid, so that the teacher can get insight into how each student is at real time on each subject and each thing, and immediate feedback, and be able to hopefully change the platform to adapt to that student's ability or inability to learn that subject.
I think that my wife is a teacher. She teaches second grade, and I think that's the concept that I see there is, it's not supplanting, but I do see the possibility of like it increases the self-learning, right? Where it's like creating joy around learning. I think we both went to Catholic grade school, right? some of the learning wasn't joyful, right? Some of it was a little force fed, right? Sister never used the paddle, right? She showed it to me a couple times, right? But it never got implemented. It was enough to see it. But my point though is like, you think about that joy around learning, lifelong learning, self-learners, autodidactics, and how much that is a critical component for like being successful. It's interesting to me how few college graduates actually read a book after they graduate, right? The numbers are staggering, right? Absolutely staggering. So that idea of like creating joy around learning and creating environments where somebody can learn, coupled with self-learning and moving to that next level, and not really, like you said, supplanting the teacher. But I do wonder, right? Like, you have been in the education game, technology for a long time. Are colleges relevant in the next decade?
I think you're going to see a lot of smaller schools close down. I think there has been a transition or is a transition for specialty schools and different things. I think they need to either transform and disrupt themselves in different ways, because I see a lot of things you're talking about where people don't realize you don't just stop learning when you get out of college. Like, that's just the beginning. You just laid the foundation for what you're trying to build. And, it's a life learning process. I mean, you should be learning, until the day, frankly, you die. Because the world is changing at fast rates that we've ever seen. Things that used to take 100 years now take a year or 3 years. And it's only going to continue the speed's only going to increase as time goes on and technology gets better and, solves more complex problems that traditionally we thought were incomplete or NP problems. They just weren't solvable, for our current understanding of how the world, universe, and things work.
The idea of college is becoming irrelevant, right? There's the part where it's like that kind of excites me to a certain degree of like, I don't want to have to pay for college for my kids, right? There's no joy there, right? But the other point is, it is a big industry. I mean, secondary education, graduate schools, they're a great source of revenue and talent for this country. Many people come to this country for that very reason, and that's what's given us a lot of success over the prevailing decades of like the best of other countries always came here because of our education system. Is it possible that we lose that edge because it is so democratized?
I don't know if we're going to lose the edge. I personally believe you're going to see the more progressive thinking ones change. They're going to realize of how the world needs to change and how they need to fit into it as well. And so you're going to see the ones that truly get it. They will change the way they teach and the way they go about. I think the traditional college as we know it is dying off, and I think that's going to have it slowed. I mean, it's not going to be, today, tomorrow, 5 years, but I think over time, they're going to have to change with the environment that's going with it. And, there's going to be some that don't change. They just, hold on, and this is what we do, and this is what we think. But being in the industry, I don't know that college is truly preparing every student for what the world holds. And so then in the 70s or 80s, you used to say, hey, I got a college degree, I automatically get a job, and I get a job with what I want to do. And like you said, that's been democratized, commoditized. Everybody's getting a college degree. And so now it's truly, how do you learn the right skill sets to prepare yourself for whatever industry you're going in?
Yeah, it is very interesting. You touch on the other subject around everybody's getting a college degree. I was having a conversation with the CIO of a kind of a niche restaurant for Chicago. And one of the things, because there's a talent gap, even at the frontline food service provider. This is like a huge issue for that environment of I think it's Chipotle is now, if you stay with Chipotle after 120 days of being employed there, they'll pay for a college degree, right? Where they know this kind of longevity is critical for their success, and having those types of people actually participate, even at that like lowest level, right? Something that you would normally get paid when we were kids, $4 an hour, right? And treated like a mule, right? And like we got good at being mules.
And they're trying to find perks that today attract the talent. And so, they understand the importance of education and they want to progress. and feel like it's more of a loyalty play, I think, as well, but also stimulate the kids and say, hey, this is a difference that we are trying to have over other companies like ours, so that we can attract more of that higher end for that market. And I think it's no different in IT or what we do in different world companies, that you have to add those additional perks to keep top talent in your company, because I think last I read that, at least for technology, the average is like 2.5 years, at a company. I mean, and so how do you prolong that, or at least get to 2.5 years?
Right.
I mean, that's really what you're fighting for nowadays, at least for a younger generation, is how do you at least get to 2.5 years so that you get the productivity out of the workers?
It's interesting. There's a very large, very successful software company, maybe rhymes with frugal, and like their average employee lifetime is less than 14 months, right? Like, I'm sure they've got a plan. I'm sure that's part of the plan. I'm sure that's not an accident. But it's like, would that work for you? Right? Would that work for me?
That kid, I mean, I don't have thick enough armor to take those many kinks or holes in the armor to say, yes, we can roll with the punches. If we only get 14 months out of you, that's a win. But I think that they have enough engineers to absorb the constant, and I'm sure it's a machine as well. They've got things down to a science that, they also know that the others will stay longer, and that will overcome the shortcomings there.
Yeah, when you're making almost $1 million in profit on every employee, you can do those kinds of things. I don't think either one of our organizations are
quite a few different constraints for that.
I wish our net margin was there, but it's not. So
I think you bring up a good point, is that's a big part of innovation is the people. I mean, I think truly people are what's going to drive innovation, and the right people. It's not just people in general. You need the right people with the right mindset that want to make the processes more efficient, want to be a part of that innovation, and strive for innovation. It's not for everybody. I don't think you can have every employee, okay, everybody's going to innovate. I mean, as much as you would love to have that, that's just not practical. And there's certain people that, your A players, and I don't know what the multipliers are, but they're 10 to 20 times, more productive, but you're going to get much more innovation out of them and having them in the right places at the right time.
Yeah. And I think that you touch on a great subject around like hiring the right people for the right role, right? Like, there's the part of your business that you make money on. You don't really want the innovators in there. Like, that's how you make money. Like you talked about, like, having the smaller group that's doing the innovation, right? This came apparent to me when we're onboarding new clients or we're doing things. I use the term, there's Marines and then there's the Army, right? The Marines they like to invade, right? The Army like to get things very accurate, right? Mm-hmm. So like when you think about like the personality types, if you put somebody who doesn't enjoy that kind of chaos in that situation, they won't be very productive.
Correct.
Right? And so is that like when you look at your team, it's like, having everybody do innovation, not everybody wants to do innovation. They don't want to do big eye innovation, right?
Yeah, and we go through kind of a cycle. I mean, we rotate and make sure cross-train and put people on different projects to find out where they really want to be. Some people come in, I want to innovate, and then all of a sudden you throw them into chaos because that's what innovation usually is. And it's like, wait a minute, I'm not ready, or this isn't for me. I need much more structure, much more, like you said, keeping the Army, the machine running so that, I don't mind working on this part instead of this.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think unfortunately, we create this perception that everybody should want to be an innovator. And it's like, you should want to innovate. It's like, what if I just want to make it work right? It's like, there's as a guy who I think tends a little bit more to the unstructured, there's nothing I love more than somebody who's really great at spreadsheets.
Yeah, absolutely. And you need that. You absolutely need that to fill what gaps. First off, identifying your gaps and then having somebody fill that, because that's still part of the business.
Right.
And then I think we're a lot alike, and, I thrive in the chaos in those sense, or controlled chaos, we'll call it.
I like to, if you ever seen the movie Backdraft, there's this great scene where they're trying to figure out, you remember the movie Backdraft? Yep. And so there's a scene where they're trying to figure out who's starting all these fires, right? And the lunatic, pyromaniac, he's like, who loves fires but doesn't want to let it free? And it's like firemen, right? And I think for you to be successful in this environment, you've got to enjoy, or you've got to be capable in chaos, but do not love chaos, right?
Absolutely.
You want to bring structure to chaos.
Just enough.
And then hand it off to somebody else and go find some more chaos,
Yep.
right? But that's otherwise what I see is people who just love the chaos. They never get traction. It never goes anywhere. They just keep breaking the machine over and over again.
Well, and that goes back to our conversation earlier of how do you keep within the confines and what's your window. So if you keep doing that and you don't show anything that's coming out of that, you're not going to be in that position for long. I mean, there's going to be a time where the patience of the company or the executives or stakeholders run out and they say, okay, we've done this for a year, 2 or 3 years, and nothing has come out of this except I see my budget or costs skyrocketing and I'm getting zero ROI for the business not moving forward.
Awesome.
And I think that's always, an important part of innovating is tying it back to the core business and showing that, doing this will result in X or Y. Now, those are projections, but you still always have to tie it down to the bottom line. I mean, that's really something that's easy to get lost in innovation. I love to be in a lab and I love to experiment and hypothesize and test and prove right, prove wrong, and move forward. But at the end of the day, if you don't have some type of measurement, data things, or KPIs in place to show that this is what's going to result in that, you're not going to be able to innovate for long. I mean, it goes back to a discussion you had earlier about, they like to talk about it. We want to talk about innovation, but really doing it is difficult because there is no formula to say for every business, this is how you always bring it back to the core business.
And I guess, isn't that really the chicken and the egg of innovation a little bit of like, when people think that ROI, right, on innovation, not understanding the terms that get thrown out are that fail fast, right? But
Fail
you also
fast,
brought
fail forward.
but you brought up a great point is something I always think that they miss when they say that, because that's like when people say agile, we don't have to plan anymore, right? And it's like, okay, so we didn't mean have no rigor or discipline. And when I think about the fail fast, I hate the phrase because it gets thrown around way too much, but I also think it should be changed to learn fast, which means keep your experiments small, right? Find the things you just shouldn't do anymore, where it's like, because you brought it up of like the lab component. Where is the scientific approach to this, right? Because I don't think many people think like, okay, so let's come up with a hypothesis and let's go test it as quickly as possible, not to fail, right? But to learn, right? And that celebration of fail fast, I just, it's like, it just smells of like lack of discipline, right? So it's like, no, we should learn fast. So how do we learn fast? Keep our experiments small and make sure that they're very focused on what we're trying to drive to as a business outcome.
And that's, I think you touched on the point too, is, agile is thrown around for that. To where, it is just chaos, but it's not. I mean, every department has some type of cadence. And so when you're innovating, to keep to that cadence or some form of that is critical because you don't want to spend months and months on doing these type of innovations that you think are going to be, and you could have learned in 2 weeks from the get-go and save yourself the headache instead of learning, having some type of milestones at each point and saying, okay, if we hit this milestone and we've done X, great, we can continue on. If we've done Y, we got to rethink our hypothesis. Like, this is not where we want to head, and going down this path will not lead to the results that we're looking for.
Obviously, I agree 100%. Is there, just kind of wrapping up, I want to ask, is there a book that you recently read? I haven't mentioned any books, and I don't get through a podcast without mentioning a book. So I'm going to put it on you. Is there a book that you think is somebody who's wants to get involved in this, wants to participate in, that you think was really helpful in developing your ideas and leadership around it?
Yeah, I know it's kind of a popular one, but for people that haven't read, it's the 0 to 1. It really is one of my favorite books because I've always felt the hardest part is going from 0 to 1. If you're on a 100-point scale, everybody looks for 100. And it's, I got my goal and I know what I want to do. And here's the thing, but just getting started, just doing something. I mean, I think one of the bigger technologies that's come out that, is going to touch everybody is AI, machine learning. And everybody thinks it can solve every problem in the world already today. The publicity behind it is, this is just going to replace humankind.
Right.
Maybe it does. I don't know. Skynet may come around. But at the end of the day, for businesses like World Book, it's how do we just get started?
Yeah.
How do we just do something to prove that, yes, this is relevant to what we're trying to do today? We have that idea, but, just getting started gives you a place to build upon. And so then you can pivot from there and say, okay, well, maybe this isn't. Maybe we don't have the talent. Maybe we bring in somebody that has specialties that do this, but just getting that first step, I think, is critical.
Awesome. Well, I want to say thanks for coming on today. I really enjoyed the conversation. I'm sure we could keep this going for another 7 hours. Maybe we get some beers involved. But I did want to say thanks for coming on and sharing your experience. The education space touches us all, right? Technology touches the education space more now than ever. And I think it's totally relevant. And I think we got some really great experience. Your background's amazing and everything that you've done. So we wish you nothing but continued success. We'll check in from time to time and find out how things are going.
Thank you, Patrick. It's been a privilege to be on.
Awesome. So we also wanted to thank our listeners. We really appreciate everyone taking the time to join us. And if you'd like to receive new episodes as they're published, you can subscribe by visiting our website at dragonspears.com/podcast or find us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. This episode was sponsored by Dragon Spears and produced by Dante32.